And now, AM 650 presents your source for leading-edge news and information on today's hottest products and services. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
Good evening and welcome to Quay Pacific's Talk About Strata here on Experts on Call. I'm Sterling Fox, joined in studio by my co-host Tony Giventu, the Executive Director of the Condominium Homeowners Association of British Columbia and Vancouver Province and 24 Hours condo columnist. Hello, Tony.
Hey, Sterling. Here we are again, another show, another good set of challenges to talk about with Strata corporations and give them some great information.
We have another guest, a new guest from the legal department. Joining us again, Stephen Hamilton is a Strata lawyer with Hammerberg Lawyers in Vancouver. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Sterling.
Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you.
Talk to us about what it's the business of being a Strata lawyer in the spring of 2014. You must be an awfully busy guy.
You know, there's never an end of challenges and disputes with Strata corporations. You know, sometimes it's like, you know, you're a social worker as well as a lawyer with Strata corporations, because when you have a lot of people living together in small quarters, there can be conflicts that arise constantly. So it keeps us busy every day.
Interesting, Tony, that Stephen would say that, because he's certainly not the first Strata lawyer we've enjoyed a visit from on this program to say precisely that. In addition to being a lawyer, I spend a fair bit of time doing social work in my Strata law practice. It's just that kind of practice, isn't it?
Well, it is like a social work practice, and I've always said that a Strata community is just kind of like living with all your in-laws. So it's 118 in-laws and 118 unit building, and you're going to have things that you agree about and disagree about. And but like most families, people disagree about money, and that's what the source of most of the conflicts in Strata corporations is about, is either disagreement on how to spend money or a lack of money placing people into some crisis.
Stephen, at Hammerberg, how many people besides yourself in the Strata section of the practice?
Well, we have 18 lawyers at Hammerberg Lawyers.
Okay.
There are 5 of us that deal almost exclusively with Strata property matters. That includes paralegals and associates and another partner of mine that works more on the development side, more on the real estate side. My practice is focused mostly on litigation, so trial work.
Okay.
A lot of lawyers separate their practices in that way: litigation, solicitor side. So
right, sure.
My practice is focused mainly on litigation.
So you spend a lot of time in court.
Well, you try not to, but
Right.
Eventually you end up there.
What are the most likely issues not to be able to be resolved outside of a court appearance and a showdown?
You know, not surprisingly, and perhaps the most volume of cases that end up in court is on the collection side for Strata corporations, when Strata corporations raise special levies for big projects, or just even the monthly Strata fees that need to be paid. Often people don't pay or can't pay, and those, more often than not, given the volume of cases that go through the system, will end up in court. It's the other kinds of disputes, often we find a way to resolve them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. The social worker stuff, eh, Tony?
Well, it's the administration. You know, Strata council members are volunteers, and yet owners have these very unrealistic expectations that they are going to basically manage their assets, take care of everything, so everyone else in the building is kind of like latchkey kids. They come and they go, but they don't really think about the day-to-day administration of the Strata, and it's stuck into the hand of volunteers. You might be fortunate enough to have a few people on council who have business administration experience. Some people might have legal backgrounds or engineering backgrounds, but collectively running the facility of a property and administering a Strata under our legislation is pretty complicated.
And Stephen, do you consult with or contract to Strata councils as well?
My contract is with the Strata Corporation, and
Okay.
I work with the Strata Council, who's governing the day-to-day affairs of that Strata Corporation.
What's
on a yearly
What's the
basis.
difference between a Strata Corporation and a Strata Council?
Well, the Strata Corporation is the collection of all of the owners in the community, and the Strata Council is there to govern the day-to-day affairs of the Strata Corporation, and they're voted in every year by the ownership.
So every Strata is, in fact, a corporation.
Exactly.
Oh, and it's administered by its own Strata Council.
Correct.
The elected volunteers, as Tony says. who I would imagine in many cases, because they're volunteers and only have so much time to give to this volunteer assignment, probably in some ways lacking in the homework department. And is that where sometimes, Stephen, disputes arise? Improperly researched approvals given by councils without a lot of information or detail involved?
Absolutely. And so many of the disputes can be resolved quite quickly once the Strata Council or the owner that may be in conflict with the Strata Corporation understands the law, understands how the Strata Property Act works. And a lot of what I do on a daily basis is to give legal opinions to Strata Councils about a particular dispute.
Right.
And once they are more educated about not only the Strata Property Act, but a lot of the cases that have been decided by judges in our province.
Case law is outstanding, right?
Yeah, there's case law that
Sure,
may have
precedents.
absolutely
Right.
that may have dealt with that particular situation, and it can be very instructive and deal with the issue quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. Tony wants to talk about construction, and before we get into the nuts and bolts of pipes and all of those other issues, I want to come back to what you were talking about, though, in terms of special levies, because this also relates to construction projects by stratas and their councils. When something happens and there aren't sufficient funds set aside in contingency to address this emergency, then a special levy is required, and each owner is required to pay a percentage of the total cost. And back to your situation, what if an owner in a strata is simply incapable of financially coming up with this surprise, $25,000, your share of the new roof or whatever? What happens to that resident or owner if they simply haven't got the money?
Well, under the Strata Property Act, the Strata Corporation is given this very powerful remedy to collect not only strata fees but special levies. And that remedy is to allow the Strata Corporation to register a certificate of lien against the owner's strata lot. And once that lien is registered against the strata lot, it becomes a priority charge over any other thing that's registered against title, mortgages, any outstanding judgments. And once the lien is registered, the Strata Corporation then can commence legal proceedings and proceed to sell the strata lot in order to recover the special levy. And those proceeds are paid out essentially first to the Strata Corporation before the mortgage or any other charges on title.
Interesting. So if you can't muster up the dough because you don't have it, you just flat out don't have it, you're able to make your mortgage payments and even your condo fees on time. But all of a sudden this out of the blue special levy comes along and literally takes you out at the knees.
It's very similar to a foreclosure type proceeding, except the amounts can be very small, and we've unfortunately had to sell strata lots where someone has owed as little as $1,500, but they just were unable to come up with any more money. They've just been in that tough of position.
Is this pretty common, Tony? Do people run into these sorts of dire straits routinely?
Well, I think that's one of the percentages that is predictable in almost every strata, that there will be a percentage of individuals who are over-risked, too much credit, their mortgage ratios are too high, they have no credit available, or the alternative is they were individuals who purchased a long time ago at a very low rate. Maybe they paid $79,900 or $89,000 for the unit, right? They retired on a fixed income, and they don't have the resources to match the capital needs that now match to a unit that's worth $400,000.
Right.
And so the costs, for renewals of buildings, but this is why our legislation changed. We went through the big change in the last 2 years for depreciation reports, and the depreciation report change now requires strata corporations to come up with a mandatory planning process of what the next 30 years looks like.
Right.
And it gives strata corporations the ability to start making some decisions about how they're going to be planning for the future economically. We had 2 more changes that occurred in the last 2 years on the legislation, and one that's about to occur this week. But they were the difference now of how you contribute and can spend money from contingency.
Okay.
Like a special levy, it's always been a 3/4 vote, but now for contingency contributions, you can contribute any amount as part of your annual budget, simple majority vote, and to expend money that if the the legislation that's currently in the ledge passes this week, the legislation that deals with spending money from contingency, if you have your depreciation report and the report says in 2015 we need a new roof and it's $200,000,
Yep, right.
the Strata puts that on the agenda for 2015 or 2014 to spend the $250,000. That's also now going to be a simple majority vote. So it's the legislation is nurturing or encouraging everybody into long-term planning, which realistically that's one of the real pitfalls, is that people as individuals aren't very good at planning economically. But part of the reason for that is they simply just didn't know. The Strata couldn't tell them when the roof had to be replaced.
And now, of course, these depreciation reports require that information to be forthcoming.
They do, but we still have fourplexes and smaller that are exempt, and any Strata who wants to pass a 3/4 vote at an AGM can also exempt, right? So we still have quite a number of buildings out there. Buyers and real estate agents are really starting to heavily rely on depreciation reports now, though. You know, it looks good, it's a great deal for $200,000, but then you go in and look at the depreciation report and see that, hey, wait a minute, in 2015 we're going to have to spend $14,000 a unit to redo the plumbing in the building,
right,
or to redo the decks and the balconies and the windows, or the elevator needs an upgrade, or the roof is ready for redoing. You know, so if the buyer comes in and says, well, wait a minute, in the next 5 years, my share of all of these things is going to be $21,000. There's not enough money in contingency. I'm going to be negotiating the price.
Exactly.
Right, and so that's what we're really realistically starting to see. And of course, now we have some evidentiary material for the buyer, for the Strata Council, for the Strata owner, about what really those estimates are going to be in the next 5 to 30 years.
Our legal guest on Key Pacific's Talk About Strata tonight is Stephen Hamilton from Hammerberg Lawyers in Vancouver. And Stephen, Tony and I have been doing this show now for a while. And one thing we're always conscious of here on AM 650 is the age of our audience. This is a boomer radio station. And a lot of people listening to us are at that period in their lives when they're making big changes. The kids are gone. They don't need that big old high-maintenance house in the burbs anymore. They want to downsize into a nice, manageable, compact existence. But, there is a lot of planning, and if you're first time going from an individual single-family home into a strata environment, there's a lot of self-educating that needs to take place. It's not just like moving into the house down the street. It's a really different environment, and these surprise expenditures are a big part of the big difference between the single-family home and the strata environment, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I used to regularly go to meetings, especially in the period of where we were dealing with a lot of the leaky condo problems, which have slowed down dramatically, but there are still buildings out there that have challenges. But dealing with the leaky condo problems, you often faced an audience that had moved from a single-family home, had experienced their own ability to decide when to do a repair and how much of a repair they were prepared to do.
Right.
And you'd go into these buildings and you'd have to explain to them, you no longer live in a single family home. You can't sit in your living room with an umbrella and watch TV because your other neighbors see this differently, and you need to understand that if the Strata Corporation is unable to convince the owners to vote yes in favor of a big capital repair to deal with a roof repair or a building envelope repair, ultimately something else has to happen. And what usually happened in those days was you would see court intervention to force the repair even if owners didn't want it to happen. And that was the big disconnect between people coming from a single family home to living in a strata property. They had to realize that they weren't completely in control of their own destiny at the end of the day.
Exactly. Tony's rule number one always has been, your home is not your castle, you share.
Yes.
And that's the big change right
then
and there, isn't it?
The biggest change.
Well, it's easier now for strata corporations to actually go to court because of another little legislative change. If you go for a 3/4 vote and it fails, and you end up that you still have half of the owners voting in favor of it, the Strata Council, on behalf of the corporation, now has the ability to make a court application to order the repair. So it's much easier now for strata corporations to get remedy. Still costs money to go to court. You still need legal advice. You still need someone to represent you when you make the application to the Supreme Court. But it is easier now, and there's much more emphasis now on strata corporations vigilantly maintaining and repairing their buildings.
Well, that's good news.
That is good news,
isn't it?
It is good news.
Need to take a quick break. This is is Key Pacific's Talk About Strata here on AM 650. I'm Sterling Fox. He's Tony Giventu from the Condominium Homeowners Association of British Columbia, of which he is the boss. And our guest is Stephen Hamilton, a partner in Hammerberg Lawyers. He's a Strata specialist. Then we'll be right back after this quick timeout.
Delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call. And there's more still ahead on AM 650.